Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for part 2 of our 2-part Connect DMV series here on the Monthly Blend. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to watch part 1 of this episode. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please go to our website at www.themonthlyblend.com and sign up. Thank you, and I hope you'll enjoy this episode. Fantastic. No, that's a unique approach. I'll turn it back over to my co-host, Anthony, who's got a bunch of questions on one of our favorite topics, startups, innovation, and sort of driving that economic development through those. Anthony?
So we touched on a few things that I wanted to hone in on in the last segment. One is this concept that you spoke about, which is regional renewal and growth. And, you know, when we think about regional renewal and growth, one of the key drivers that drives growth is startup activity. So new technologies and new business models as a driver of growth. And the second thing that you spoke about was just assets, so strategic assets in the region and what type of assets. So I'd like to kind of bring those two thoughts together and to kind of understand from each of your perspectives what you see are the DMV, within our startup ecosystem in the DMV, are regional strengths and regional challenges as you look at the DMV, and all of you have really a national viewpoint as well. So also as you see those strengths and weaknesses or challenges against other regional hubs. So George, maybe we could start with you on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. This is a very interesting topic that people have been deep diving on for the last 20 years, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And, you know, we in the DMV don't really have a big reputation for attracting a lot of investment. And we look at the types of companies that come out of here. There aren't that many that make the press with regard to what it is. And one of the threads that I've always read is we are great at creating services type businesses, less so at creating product type businesses in the DMV. Most of anybody, and we have a lot of skills and talent and companies and alumni who have come out of the DMV have gone on to create massive companies in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. But that doesn't take root as well here as possible. And that's something we are very aware of. We have, you know, going back to strength and assets, right? We have a tremendous depth of strength and assets when it comes to deep tech, when it comes to domains like biosciences. We have a lot of assets, a lot of creativity, a lot of capability. I think what might make that better is creating networks where those capabilities and strength can provide access for the people who are the builders on the builder side of the house. And that's both just new startups, IP that's coming out of all kinds of universities and research centers, and also innovation labs that are coming out of big corporations that are started here in the DMV and other places, is trying to figure out how do we network those assets to give them the right capabilities and connections to do it. On the flip side of the house, when you're talking about buyers and funders like less risky things. When you're looking at funders specifically, risk mitigation is a big thing, which then kind of defaults itself into trying to look at products that have a market, products that are a little bit more stable, and you know that's how they mitigate risk, especially from a private venture perspective or a PE perspective. From a regional perspective, we haven't done as good a job to take those strengths and assets and connect them up into a holistic whole. And if you look at the buyers themselves, you know, there's private industry buyers. We have a significant strength in everything from cybersecurity to aerospace and defense to biotech to, you know, a number of those domains. We have major buyers here. But the biggest buyer in all of the world is the US federal government for pretty much most things. I mean, they are the largest buyer and they are here. And we are co-located with them. And we need to create a better network to have them have access to the new tech. Like I call new tech and deep tech, you know, death by 1,000 cuts, right? So if I'm in government or if I'm a large industry, I don't have the time to listen to 1,000 pitches to figure out what 3 might work for me. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So you need constructs where somebody can help be the conduit, that glue to absorb those 1,000 cuts and figure a way for big government and big industry to buy the right top 10. What is that glue? What is that construct? And I think from a DMV perspective, we have a very unique set of players with the federal government, with big industry here to provide that layer that sits in between to improve the types of innovation that happens in the DMV. Like competing directly with Silicon Valley on tech or with New York, Boston on sciences may not necessarily be the answer. I think we have a unique play here in that ecosystem for what we might consider an innovation, the types of companies that grow out of here.
Just to add to George's excellent points, obviously this region has benefited from being the home of the federal government, and we do have a pretty rich ecosystem around services related to the federal government. Clearly, we have a growing cyber base, cyber services, cyber products. Of course, we've got the terrific biotech and life sciences cluster. Two things that I would say is clearly one of the assets this region has is our universities, and historically we have not done as good a job really leveraging that asset as much as we really should and can. And I think, you see Virginia Tech, UVA investing heavily in this region. Clearly, Amazon's location of HQ2 plays a role in that, but they were starting to invest in this region even before then, and now it's really on steroids. But clearly, universities in Maryland, University of Maryland, Hopkins, and of course, all of the universities within the region, we need to do a better job with the commercialization, with the transfer of tech transfer. What I would say from a system standpoint, if you look at regions that have been successful, and let's just take Austin, for example, I think by bringing together big businesses, startup businesses, and everything in between, they like stability and certainty. It impacts, the ability to finance and provide funding. It provides the stability for angel investors. It provides a healthy ecosystem. And so I think our efforts at Connected DMV to create the system change in terms of how the regional operating model, by bringing together the partners, the universities, industry, and government to create that more stable, sustainable ecosystem, that will have an effect on what we need to do tangibly and specifically as it relates to helping the startup community and both diversifying it as well as continuing to strengthen it.
So one very kind of tactical thing that we are engaged with is to try to look ahead in the deep tech space, in the sciences space, and say what is coming down the pipe that we could grasp and what could we do that would make a difference 5 years from now. It's great to kind of go back and look at data science, go look back at cybersecurity and saying how did that evolve and what came about it, and how did it land in certain places versus others. Everybody started from an equal playing field like 15 years ago if you looked at cybersecurity, but we have winners and losers. And that's true across the board when you look at domains, right? So one of the things we did very intentionally starting about 2 years ago is to start to do that mapping. What could we be in 5 years based on what's coming down the pipe? And that's manifested in itself in one of the things is around quantum. Is what we've really kind of put our heads around and saying this is an area that is definitely going to be a dynamic shift change from the stuff that we have done. I was recently, part of a talk where Dr. Bill Phillips gave an analogy that, the PCs, the laptops we use today, how different they are from an abacus. If you think about that technology difference between an abacus and the PC that you're using today, that difference is substantially going to be larger from the difference from a PC to a quantum computer, to give you a sense of the scale of the shift that's going to come down the pipe. So the Potomac Quantum Innovation Center is one of the initiatives that we are very actively for the last couple of years have been working on, is to take advantage of it, knowing fully well this is coming down the pipe. To Matt's point and to Stu's point earlier, we have assets in the region across quantum at the universities. University of Maryland is the number 4 university for quantum in the world. We have tremendous assets in regional FFRDCs like MITRE, We have big conglomerations here like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM who are doing quantum. And of course, we have the federal government, significant amount of work being done in quantum in the region. So we are kind of already creating a network of public-private industry in quantum, looking ahead 5 years, saying, if we want to be known, the DMV is one of the centers of quantum in the world, what should it look like? That I've been building the piece parts to kind of move it down that angle. One of which is around startups. We have a number of incubators, accelerators here in the region. We are working with UMD and others to create what the quantum startup economy is going to look like. The big startup in the quantum space that made press the last couple of weeks is IonQ. Now, IonQ was started at the University of Maryland. It's the first major startup story in quantum, $2 billion valuation. There'll be a many number of those that's come down the pipe, and we want a good number of those to come from the DMV. So what is that ecosystem that we could see? So from a connected DMV perspective, to Stu's point of additive looking ahead, that's been really our focus. Let's find areas, what are we good at? What are the assets? How do we network them? How do we think ahead a few years, put the pieces in place? So by design, in 5 years, we are a center for quantum in the world.
And if can I just add on to that of what Matt and George were saying? I think really what of our assets is our universities and the number of PhDs we have in the region. But then there's the yin and the yang. We need to develop talent pipelines with those that are underserved so that we have lifelong learning. And so to do that, we're going to have to connect the educational ecosystem with the industry ecosystem so that we can meet the workforce demands of the future, which is going to be quantum if you look 3 to 5 years out. And so how do we prepare now so that we can meet that and that we're not bringing the talent in, but we're developing the talent within the region?
Ecosystems is a word that you keep hearing from us. And, we live in an innovation age, and it's, as George says, it's accelerating. And what we believe is that the innovation and the digital age does not work in silos, right? It cannot work in silos. It only works in an integrated fashion. That means standardization. That means basically common views, common approaches and technologies, but it means collaboration as well. And so everything that we do is around this integration of ecosystems because we believe that's a requirement for entry into the digital age. So, again, I don't think we can overemphasize that, and you'll see that in every one of our initiatives.
One of you guys talked about, the importance of stability and de-risking. And one of the questions around de-risking, if you look at the different risks that emerging growth companies facing, so in terms of market risk, finding product market fit, and execution risk, and product or technology risk, and capital risk. And we've talked a little bit about, just Sarah just talked about building up in terms of people within the region, and so many incredible universities that are here having the talent on the execution side. And we've talked about, just again, through universities and research facilities in the region, there's a lot of fantastic technology that is coming out. And the one risk I'd like to just kind of understand, because you guys really are looking at this in a very unique and powerful way. And again, with your vision combined with the team that you put, you're able to look at things in ways and look at problems from perspectives that people maybe haven't thought about it before. But how do you see addressing the capital risk part of it? So how do you see bringing in the capital that's going to be needed for some of these earlier stage companies as they start de-risking some of the other areas of their business in terms of capital inflow and risk capital inflow and growth capital inflow into the region?
It's going to sound maybe a little flip, but I think it's still very true. Look, capital goes where people have their act together. Capital goes to where the right partners are in place in a real way, and so by showing that we have brought the assets together, the labs, the research institutions, industry, that there is fundamentally collaborative approach between government, community. That helps set the stage for capital to come in. Clearly we have some great success stories. NEA is not here for by accident. The venture and other PE money that's in the region isn't here by accident. We clearly need to expand that. But we also, quite frankly, we need to look at other traditional, areas of financing that, again, like, to your point, Anthony, like the stability, like to have the de-risked environment. So, I think, again, we're not doing as this region historically has been, one of the silos has been between our institutions of higher education. And the fact that we have not lifted up that asset as well as we can. And when you look across the country at those metropolitan areas that have done a good job, they have really leveraged their higher education and research assets much better than we have. So I think that's a job for us ahead.
George, it might be worth also touching on. I mean, one of the things that we did by design was we brought that venture community into the upfront design kind of and requirements portion of some of the things we're doing, like on REDS and like the funding community, Matt, you brought in on the Pandemic Center. And so that they're at the table, not on the side as an adjacent piece that's only there for the money, but they're actually part of shaping what these new solutions look like, especially since a lot of the capital is going to come from them.
Yeah, I can take so one of the phrases we use very regularly at Connected DMV is creating an informed loop between buyers and builders. And the phrase came from the fact that if you look at anything new that's been created, there's usually a 20-year timeline between an idea in a lab to it being in operations in industry in a regular way. It's a 20-year timeline. Take whatever you take, right? From a light bulb onwards, it's a 20-year timeline. So how do we reduce that? Even if you reduce it by like 5 years, you're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars by being able to do that. And the way to do that is, we feel by creating this informed loop, to Stu's point, having the buyers at the table, knowing what they're buying. And I'm not talking about product. I'm talking about product. I'm talking about people. I'm talking about solutions. I'm talking about what they can actually provide that will help the buyer. And in the buyer is the people with the money and the people who actually will use the solutions. They're both in that same bucket. So in many of our initiatives, you'll find the buyer set at the table. If I stick with just the quantum example, one of the things we're doing is we did a mapping in early 2020 on what are we good at as a region from an industry perspective. And then we mapped that against what are the types of solutions quantum can first try to help solve. And we came up with 4 industries. We are really good at it. Quantum has first mover advantage in it. A couple of them being life sciences and national security. So for each of the 4 domain areas that quantum can help, we are now seeding domain cohorts that come from that domain, which includes a smattering of industry players, big and small, smattering of federal players like NIH, CDC type players, and a smattering of deep technical expertise who are kind of trying to solve in that areas. And that seating of like 15 to 20 people is going to meet on a regular basis, be a user group before there's a product, as it were, that then is sitting at the table with all of the builder sets, from startups to universities to FRDCs, to then influence. If you build product that looks like this, I have a better chance to buy it. Here is a test bed for you. I am going to look to hire these kind of people. Universities, K through 12, go build people that look like this. Therefore, I can hire them more. Here's the path to internships and apprenticeships for this process to evolve. From a pure funder perspective, philanthropy, PE, VC, here's what we're doing. What would you like to have this look like for you to be more comfortable? Federal government, grants and funds. This is what we're trying to do. What structure would you like it to take? Be at the table and help guide the builders. So that kind of informed loop is kind of like part of the fabric at Connected DMV and a number of things that we're doing. I use quantum because I started with it, but that's true across REDS, for hydrogen, for pandemic. That's kind of like the approach that we have to hopefully help with the de-risking. Now, de-risking is a very personal term depending on where you sit within the funding cycle and what type of entity you are. So you can't come up with like a silver bullet saying, by doing A, B, and C, we have de-risked the project. I mean, that's never going to happen. It's more like creating that ecosystem where trust is built, which is a big part of de-risking. with regard to what is being done, who's actually building it, what it will be, and having the buyers at the table. So that's kind of been our approach from a larger scale on how we're thinking about this.
Great. Well, you have given us a lot to think about, and really actions that can be taken in the next year that are going to start to plant the seeds for what can be in place 5 years from now. I'd like to now hand it back to Tien.
Thank you, Anthony. So we're very lucky and fortunate to be living in a diverse region. All right, we have diverse in terms of education level, economic level, race, background, culture, etc. So we have an advantage, and this question concerns ESG. We have an advantage over, say, Silicon Valley or even Austin or other places because our ingredients are already here. And it's been great to see that the various universities and agencies, corporations, and other constituents have adopted and embraced ESG. And I'm loving the fact that on a national basis, they're starting to walk the talk. And I know all four of you have a national and in some cases an international viewpoint on, society and the frameworks that you're working on. But in terms of ESG, what do you see as sort of the bright spots for the DMV region? And what is Connected DMV doing to ensure that this is a sustainable movement and not just sort of a fad, right? That we can build this in and it flows into everything, education, startups, as Anthony was just talking about, and innovation. How do we make this a permanent feature, if you will, and an advantage, a competitive advantage of the DMV? I'll start with Matt, since this is a kind of a strategy related question, and then we can go around the horn, and very curious in Sarah's viewpoint as well.
Thanks, Tien. So I think you start with the fact that it is in our DNA. It is explicitly, our mission objective, the intertwined nature of both economic renewal and social equity. There's some tectonic shifts going on right now in corporate America, especially with large corporations that you point out in terms of they're starting to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Now, will that be sustainable? I think that's, something it's a good question for us to ask, but it is certainly happening now. And I think the partners, if you look at the partners that we've brought together, and the very fact that we've, I think, changed the mindset for too long, this region has had the divide, whether it's an economic divide, a digital divide, services divide, education divide. The divide is there. As a very wealthy region, we also have some of the deepest inequity, in the country, certainly. So what we have tried to do, based on, again, baked into our DNA, our approach, is to bring in the right partners and collaborative strategic partners to really tackle this and make sure that we are looking at it with that new lens, with that fresh lens, and making it a fundamental part of what we do. So I'll stop there because I know my colleagues have much more to add.
Yeah, before Sarah jumps in, I did want to say that, and we've had this conversation internally as well as externally, as well as with many guests, the golden rule, right? If she who has the gold makes the rules. So we're seeing limited partners and public pension funds that are investing into private equity and venture capital funds sort of requiring this now and making this, this old boys network is really not going to be around for much longer if this continues. And you're also seeing the sprouting up of new, we talked about capital. You're seeing the sprouting up of new sources of capital, first-time funds led by women, led by minorities and immigrants, and all this awesome stuff. So I think that is definitely something to look at. Is if the billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of retirements money is forcing investors and corporations to sort of adopt and deliver on their promise of ESG, that could be something good. But I know, Sarah, you've got tremendous background working with, some of the biggest players in in the field. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so my experience is that inequities really stem from policy and practice. And that disproportionately affects opportunity for marginalized populations. So I think, you really have to get into the system and look at policies, practices, the programs, and then change the culture and the mental models of how they operate. Um, and also, one of the things I did at the Gates Foundation is actually go visit the marginalized populations to understand how they think. Oftentimes we want to overlay some of the initiatives or the solutions that we think that they need to uplift them, and then what is it that they actually really need. And so getting those thoughts into the mindset, I think, is going to be important. But really looking at policies and procedures, I think, is critical, and looking at the system itself.
Stu, what are your thoughts? How do we make this thing sustainable? Is there an opportunity for DMV to emerge as a real, I don't want to use the word competitor, but a real alternative for companies like Amazon and others to come here because of our awesome diversity and our focus on ESG?
Yeah, I think the potential for us is huge because we've been dealt the best hand. We just need to play it well. And so when I think about we're moving this task force into an enduring regional Congress, and that we're providing the means on a sustainable basis going forward for our region to come together and work together on these issues. But specifically within ESG, one of the things that we would note is that a lot of the issues we view as issues of infrastructure. And I think if we look historically at our region, the way we've tackled these problems have kind of been in one-off siloed ways, but we've been building bridges, right? And those bridges have tried to basically take a really good and well-intended initiative for a very specific purpose to get somebody to basically out of the situation they're in Anacostia and get them over to Georgetown. And the way we would look at that is, that was very well intended, but the divide that we have in this region is massive. The east-west divide, we would call it. And the divide has a huge gorge in the middle of it. And instead of building bridges over the gorge, we need to fill it in. And the way we'll fill it in is with social, digital, and physical infrastructures. And by doing that, that's a very different approach than how we've looked at these types of issues in the past. And that means, look, who pays the most for money? The poor do. They pay the most for money. They don't have credit. And it costs them a whole lot more to use their money than it costs maybe the rest of us to use our money. That's an inequity that exists. There are ways through digital innovation that we can address that in a really robust way, but that's an infrastructure play. That's treating money for the poor like running water. Digital connectivity, right? Everyone needs that to function. Just like, years ago, as we were thinking about getting electricity and running water to certain communities, now that's normal and we know that everyone needs it and expects it. Well, digital connectivity needs the exact same thing. These are infrastructure questions. Let's not deal with them as one-off kind of pilot projects. Let's say, what are the massive infrastructure components that are needed that take decades to get right? And let's fill the gorge in with those, not build bridges to try to get around it, right? And so I think that's a big part of the strategic intent that you'll see from us. George has done a lot of work around studying this east-west divide, and it might be worth talking about that for a minute.
Yeah, sure, Stu. Stu's exactly right. The problems that we have when we talk about the East-West divide are systemic and have been created because of 1,000 years of policy, actions, things like that. I think, nobody's expecting anybody to solve it in the next 6 months. It's going to take decades to get out of it. But, filling in the gorge is the mechanism to do it. And by providing mechanisms for tracking what that is, the measurement of that is going to be critical for attracting ESG from especially large corporations to come here and saying, this is why it's moving the needle and it's moving it differently. And part of that process from our perspective has been underneath the regional economic strategy, the REDS umbrella, is to try to look at it. We call it our economic opportunity and equity model, where we are looking at that large kind of canvas of economic opportunity in the region every initiative that's going on, let's take one food security for the region. When the pandemic hit, there was a tremendous hit and it exposed the seams within the structure on food security in the region. Even in places like Fairfax, this demand for food was spiking. But it is a very disjointed delivery engine for distribution of food in the region by design. It's mostly not for profits. It's a lot of community organizations and churches that's doing the last mile. So, when we talk about deep tech, it doesn't have to be space tech or in a quantum. It is basic blocking and tackling of these kind of things that we can then build boulders around. So out of our economic opportunity and equity index that we're kind of building as a measurement tool under REDS, there'll be layers, one for food security, one for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that we can then say, are we moving the needle? What is the stuff that needs to move the needle? How does that become a boulder for the region? So today, if you look across the 24 local governments in the region, they each have programs underneath it for food security. We have large institutions like the Capital Area Food Bank or AFAC that are not, non-governmental entities that provide food distribution. Every major supermarket chain has food distribution, and that's just from an organization perspective. Food is distributed by very different layers, like K through 12 has its own system. Everybody in school, the food that is distributed in schools have their own system. That's not connected to anything else. There's food distributed to elder care that's not connected to anything else. So part of it, looking at it to create a boulder versus these bridges, I would call all of these bridges, is how do we integrate and work across all of those? Part of that was, in December of last year, we did a regional resilience workshop just focused on food security, where we brought all these actors into a room and said, what do we need to do to come together and build it? And one very clear aspect that came out of that discussion was nobody's in charge of fixing the large scale problem. Everybody's in charge of fixing the silo that they are in, either by policy within a jurisdiction or by mandate for whatever not-for-profit that they are. So there is a missing gap right there. So that's really the places that net new add, we see ourselves stepping in, identifying those silos where there are a number of bridges and saying, let's do that, but let's also focus on how do we make the need for bridges go away eventually.
But maybe just a couple more comments.
Sure.
I think importantly, when we think about our initiatives, as George was talking about, RED, on pandemic, this goes back to, the model of connected DMV, rather than say social equity or addressing the inequities in addressing pandemics, have that as sort of a sidecar. It is, foremost part of our overall objective through the pandemic prevention center. And as we look to make that real and launch the center, that will be part of the DNA. Because, and I think that goes to a larger point. And again, we can lead the way at Connected DMV, but we've got to get away from these issues being just, CRA type funds with our local banks and regional banks and national banks. We've got to get it away from just being seen as ESG funds. This has to be part of a fundamental mindset shift by all of the partners, because there's been a ton of money invested in this region by the federal government, by state governments, by local governments, through ESG and CRA funds. Until we have sort of systems change and a new regional operating model, it's when Einstein said, you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. That's insanity. We have to, right? We've got to do things differently. And again, it sounds flip, and it's going to be incredibly difficult because we have decades plus, of systemic barriers to overcome. But by making this a fundamental part of our mindset, that's going to be key. And Connected DMV can lead the way on that. Certainly is not going to be the only answer, but by bringing the right partners together in a true collaborative fashion, we can help move the needle.
Yeah, I'm totally inspired and blown away by all the leadership and the activity that you guys are bringing to the table here, and most importantly about the execution piece, the strategy and the execution, how you're able to make huge progress in such a small amount of time and bring so many people to attack these serious problems, as George mentioned. So Yeah, I would love to turn it back over to Anthony as we close out our segment here.
Like Tien said, in addition to being tremendously informative and insightful, this has been, so inspirational. And I think people listening are going to be very inspired. So the last question before we close out the show is, anyone who listens to today's show and feels as inspired as Tien and I feel, who are interested in getting involved with Connect to DMV, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way for folks that want to help and be part of this region coming together, you can reach us directly through our website. And Sarah talked about the solution groups, the grassroots effort that we've got going on. There are hundreds of people like you volunteering already that want this region to be better. And we will help integrate you into the overall regional equation to do just that. The solution groups are the mechanism, and Sarah's helping lead that for Connected DMV.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think also helping with the reinforcement of the message, which is that we are truly multi-sector, doing the net new thing. So this is not, for those, because we're going to have several people who are involved with one or more regional organizations, already here in the DMV. In the DMV region, and we want to make sure that our message in terms of who we are is clear, so that we're seen as that collaborative partner and not a competitor. So if you're a member of the Northern Virginia Chamber or the Maryland Technology Council or the Board of Trade or the Federal City Council, or you're somehow engaged with them, to know that they are at the table and collaborating in a real way, and that this is not to replace that, as Stu said earlier, or to replicate, but this is very much that strategic collaborative effort doing net new things, and we want you to be part of that.
Yeah, and to your specific audience from an entrepreneurship perspective, I think our tent is big and open, and we want to get as many kind of innovators and thinkers and entrepreneurs into this mechanism as possible. So entrepreneurs, having been in that world for a while, tend to get very siloed in what they're doing with the market product fit, with trying to figure out where the next client is from. They don't think 2 years out, and it is fine that they don't, because they are on a mission, and they're living on couches to kind of make sure that that happens for them. But this network can really help them accelerate the path to test beds, the path to pilot projects, the path to money. So we would very much encourage, your listeners from that part of the world not to think of us as this big, large, behemoth construct with, a dozen big institutions. This is for everybody, and this is just as much for them to become successful on behalf of the region as it is for anybody big. So please get engaged with us, even if you are, two people and an idea.
And I will add in that exactly what Stu was saying. And I think getting involved in the solution groups, we need thought partners, we need leaders to really help guide us and help us to understand what the region needs and what's happening within the region around us. And also, funders. In order to really make this happen, we need to have people partner with us financially, thought partnership, in any way that they can. So we welcome that.
Well, thank you guys so much. I think for our listeners, www.connecteddmv.org is the website. There's something for everybody. The initiatives that this group is tackling are significant and very quite impressive, to be frank. And I think that your welcoming attitude and mentality, guys, is a large reason for your success, in addition to your smarts and your global approach. But again, as a citizen here in the region, I speak on behalf of Anthony. We're very grateful for leaders like you guys and organizations like Connected DMV. And I've lived here over 35 years, and this is really the first time I've seen something in that time that's actually doing something. Like, you actually have results. And I guess you bring that sort of outcomes focused approach to all of your activities, and it's paying off. The thing that shocks me is how you're able to do it in such a short amount of time. So please keep doing what you're doing. And I hope that our audience will definitely get involved. And Once again, I'd like to thank Stu, Matt, Sarah, and George very much for your time and for sharing your wisdom and your stories. And also, for those of you who have not subscribed to the Monthly Blend, our website is www.themonthlyblend.com. And with that, Anthony and I would love to thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Thank you, guys.